do-over.
Sorry about that. Sure. I don't know if I'm going to do a full do-over.
It's
We'll do it all
okay.
morning.
Yeah.
I actually have to be up by 9:30.
Start
You
back
can do a
at one.
summary version of the report you just gave.
Yeah. Will she give you a green light so we know?
We don't have the ability to get green lights in here, which is unfortunate. So I will. Okay, TV 79, I hope that you're ready. Take 2. This is the Operations Planning Committee for September 16th. Welcome, everybody. It's great to see everybody in person. I think that we're going to start with Tara this morning since school's open, and we'd love to hear how it's going. Good morning, Tara.
Sure. So we started and I gave an overview. I'll do it quicker this time, just because I know we started and we were getting into the meat of the conversation just that schools are open. We're in the hybrid model. It has not been without its controversies, but I do think the superintendent feels that it's been the right thing in order to test the system. I think it's probably pretty similar to how most businesses are looking at opening, most of how we're doing things in town. It's certainly, we look forward to hearing from all the voices. We know there are strong opinions. We have people who believe schools should be closed. We have people who believe schools should be open fully. So we have a special meeting Thursday morning. We welcome those voices there. We have another regular meeting Tuesday. But we are on track, and by all indications from the administration, for a full reopening September 29th with 5 days of school, and welcoming all children back who have not opted to do the full remote learning as available by the governor's order. Additionally, I was just about to say when we started over again that the COVID opening schools with COVID has not been without significant expense. We have kept the Board of Finance up to date with our reports, but we look to go before them October 20th for a more in-depth conversation. Certainly with the pandemic, there have been changes to how schools can run and making sure both our children and our employees are safe. So we look forward to those conversations, and we've appreciated the words of support that the town is here for us in order to do that safely for our children and our teachers. And with that, again, quick overview from the longer report before. I'm happy to take any questions that people have.
Thank you. Seth, you were making a point.
Well, just to say that I thought about this, and there's a window of opportunity for children to get their education. So when you get a disruption like this, it pushes the window, the timing out, and it makes it hard to get the education done in the normal time frame. Instead of 12 or 16 years, it moves out into the 20 if you can't get it all done. So this is a real challenge. It really is.
It's a challenge, and I think our teachers are up for it. And I think that they are adjusting. And I think many of our families are. That doesn't mean that any concerns they have aren't valid, and we'll hear them and weigh it with our educational professionals. I think sometimes what it also is communication and understanding and explaining learning, but I do believe we've got some very learned professionals who have done this for a long time that can help guide us, and I think the children will be well served. Given the environment, which is, I agree with you, Seth, incredibly challenging and not what any of us thought we would be dealing with when we came into public office.
Right. Just one other thing on the expenses. If you're going to come before the RTM, we have a meeting in October. So just look at the timing there.
What day is that meeting?
I think it's the 23rd. And that's a little, I'd have to check.
So I think as we, just again for the benefit of everyone listening, as we've all discussed, what we'll do is we're planning on working out of our appropriation as best we can. And so I think at the moment, if we come before anybody, it would be for updates as opposed to a request at this point. I would anticipate at some point during the year in a request for an additional appropriation. I hope that we will not, if we're able to find cost savings in other areas where there's other things that don't happen and therefore we can transfer, we will look to manage as best we can within our current appropriation. So we would come if we needed to later in the year, I think.
November and December have a lot of kind of like pro forma RTM meetings,
Yeah.
state of the town, and, you know, so you just want to figure that in.
Are you looking more for after the first of the year, if you were gonna come for any request?
That's my gut, Kate, after first of the year, but, you know, barring anything, I feel like every time we have a plan, these days, the world throws us
All
something.
right.
But my plan, I think, would be that we would be able to work out of our appropriation at least until then.
So Seth, maybe you'd look for them to do an update for you, at your October meeting, which is either the 20th or the 27th, those would be the 2 Mondays.
And I've reached out to Jack and Claire, I think we'll be at you on the 20th, so that might actually work very well in terms of the flow, or we can, if representatives want to be at the October 20th meeting and then have conversations, we're happy to do that as well.
All right, we'll deal with it when we.
As it comes.
That's
As long as we're
what
all
we do,
flexible
yeah.
these days.
Okay, just a couple of questions for me. I've been seeing in the news that some schools, they could be private schools, have gone to the extraordinary measure of when there's been a case in school, they've closed the school. I understand that you guys are cohorting, and you know, the beauty of that is that if you do have a case that you only have to send home a smaller group of students. Is that still your current understanding if a case should present itself while the kids are actually in school?
Yes, so, and on the Darien Public Schools website, there's the reopening plan. There's a tab on that specifically deals with quarantining and incidences of COVID, and it can tell anyone, but including parents, what that might look like. Our plan right now would be for quarantining direct exposure and maintaining schools open for as long as we can. The governor did just come out with some new language the other day. I have to wade through that, but in my initial read, I did not see anything that would alter our plan or that would force us to alter our plan. So our goal is to keep kids in school and open for as long as is possible. But following the metrics laid out by the State Department of Education, one case in a school would not close down a school. And you've seen this happen. Stanford's already had to quarantine some sections. Westport has. Norwalk has. I don't believe Greenwich has, but I know they actually pushed their start date back because they had a cohort of teachers who had tested positive. So knock on wood, we have not had that experience yet. And I think that's a credit to Darien and to people being, you know, responsible and really working this system. But at this moment, there are metrics for when schools would close down, and one case would not close down a school.
Perfect. I am aware that the state is setting the regional metrics, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which I wanted to share this morning, that one little glitch that our local health director is working on with the state board of health is that all the college kids that got tested before they went off to college, those results are coming back, and some of those results are positive, and they're flowing into the aggregate data, even though those kids are not in state and are not planning to come back in state. So I've raised that issue, being very mindful that we want to make sure that whatever data is being used to make the decisions about the schools, that, you know, the State Board of Health understands that they need to pull those cases aside, that they don't aggregate into the overall formula. I just wanted to say that David Knopf, our local health director, is working very closely with the district. I think that he was doing walkthroughs yesterday.
Yeah, I think they've met almost weekly at this point.
Which is great.
Yeah.
But if there's anything else that you need of local health, please let us know.
No, David, just to take a minute to thank them, David and also Tim Kenefick have been excellent and kind of deserve kudos for all their work and their willingness to constantly stay up to date.
Which is great. And I know the State Department of Education and health professionals have a weekly Zoom call to answer all the questions from the districts. So that's also very helpful. Do you anticipate that there would be any more state funding that would come to help offset any future expenses that the Board of Ed has for reopening?
I have not
I haven't
heard of
heard
any. I have not heard of any. It doesn't mean it's not there. Keep me honest here. I know some of the initial COVID funding, it was held for a while, then it was released down. We received some, about 100,000 and change. I don't know if that's been exhausted, if there's any more out there, but I haven't heard of any new funding that would be coming our way from a new funding source
Okay.
at the state level.
Yeah, I think I heard Jen say in your meeting last night, John, that $130,000, and then that got immediately passed through to
Right.
Yes.
the administration.
So we've already kind of used that to pay down some of our expenses.
Great. Okay, and then one last thing, just a reminder in case you need it, we do have our drive-through testing professional here, Murphy Medical. And if there's ever an interest to have testing at the schools for teachers, admin, students, please let me know. Steve Murphy's really willing to work with us on whatever it is that we need to help things go smoothly here.
Thanks.
Sure. Okay, anything else for Tara? No, okay, then we'll go to John. Good morning.
Thanks, Jamie. Good morning, everyone. Couple of things. We met last night, and one of the things that we reviewed at the board meeting was just the fiscal outcome from the end of the last fiscal year, which ended in June. I think there's still a few puts and takes, but it's actually quite remarkable. I wanted to point out a few things. One is that we ended the year with a overall surplus for town, Board of Ed, everything of about $570,000. And what's interesting about that is that we had planned to draw down about $2.1 million out of fund balance for some debt retirement that we'd planned in a broader scheme of work that we'd been doing. And frankly, the performance had been good enough that we didn't have to draw down that money, so it stayed in fund balance. So even despite the uncertainties at the end of the fiscal year around COVID expenditures and all of that, we still ended up with a surplus of $500,000. And one of the great things is that if you look at all the major expenditure categories, not just Board of Ed, but really all the town departments, and look at the sheet that I have, which has got the favorable and unfavorable variances, which would be an indication of whether they met their budget or not. Every single one had of these groups had a positive variance. In other words, they were under budget. And it's just a further testament around how much attention everybody pays to their budgets and their expenditures. And that's not just for the town, it's for the Board of Education as well. There's a lot of effort to try and make sure that we stay within our budget limits. And I think everybody should get a shout out for that. It's not just the elected officials, it's really all the town staff and Board of Education staff that has their hands on the tiller for all of this on a day-to-day basis. It's a great testament to how well this town is run, in my judgment. So I just wanted to highlight all that. So further coming out of that, one of the things that's important in terms of dealing with these COVID expenditures and related uncertainties is the question as to whether we have enough town reserves to pay for all that. So as I've said before, fund balance is the reserve account where we keep all of that. Right now, or really at the end of the fiscal year, that stood at almost $26 million. If you think about the Board of Finance policy on this, which is to keep it at sort of a minimum of 12% of budgeted annual revenues, that we have a surplus in that account above the minimum amount we need to keep in the account of just over $8 million. So if I think about the expenditures, which we'll talk about in a minute, that Tara brought up for the Board of Education, and I know the town has had some expenditures, everybody should be comfortable that we've got good reserves in place to pay for this. So that's unlike, I think, other towns in Connecticut, but we're in pretty good shape with regard to having reserves to cover some of these expenditures. Not to say that there's a blank check for any of that, and we want to continue to be careful about that. But really everybody in town should know that we've got enough reserves, at least as I see it, to cover the expenditure and pace of expenditure growth on COVID that I've seen so far. A couple other things to note. I mentioned last night, and hope I'll just communicate this formally today, that building on a point that Tara made about whether the Board of Education is going to need more money for COVID expenditures as a technical matter, when they got an appropriation for the RTM for their whole budget and it was more than $100 million, and as long as they haven't spent that, they actually don't need an appropriation. And so they're taking money from funds that have been appropriated for the Board of Education, they're spending it on this. We do all want to collectively keep informed about it, because the time that they might need extra money through an appropriation would be later in the fiscal year and into 2021. So I think the strategy that you have of coming before the boards, keeping everybody informed as to how those expenditures are progressing, just gives us sort of a heads up as to what that appropriation might be later in the fiscal year. So to that end, at our next Board of Finance meeting on October 20th, I think it would be great to have an update like that. And we've talked, you and I have talked about that. I talked about it at the Board of Finance meeting last night, and also from the Board of Selectmen, if you'd see fit to do that. I think the spirit of that would not be that we need an appropriation at the moment, but really just to keep everybody collectively informed. And as an efficiency matter, if we can get all the right folks in that meeting, even from the RTM, to hear that and have this done once, right, then that would obviate the need to repeat the same presentation to the RTM later in the month and free up your agenda for that meeting. So I'd recommend that if you can take that to your RTM colleagues, see if that's okay with them. We certainly can have their presence in the meeting, and of course this would be taped for viewing by others. One of the things that we'll try to do on the Board of Finance, and I announced this last night, but would welcome anybody on the RTM doing it, is I'm going to send around the information that we have so far, which Tara has forwarded for the Board of Education, and let folks ponder that, see if they have any questions, and try to get them to you in advance so that we have those communicated to you, so that when we do have the session on the 20th, all the questions have been sort of teed up and you've had a chance to think about them, and we, of course, do the same for the Board of Selectmen. So other than that, I think we are in good shape. I don't have, the only other thing I'd mention is that we have started this process for reviewing these various accounts that are capital reserve accounts. And the purpose of that is just to engage in a cleanup of all that, which we've previewed previously. And that work continues apace. They've just gotten started, but it looks like we're going to have some rationalization of some of that. So what we'll do is present that to the Board of Selectmen, let you take a look at both our findings and then recommendations in terms of how to do those capital accounts going forward. So number of accounts, criteria for when you would set them up, and when you would review and close them, and just update that for your consideration. So that's all from me.
Okay, thank you. The one thing I did hear in your meeting, there was a question about the basement of 35 Leroy. And that project, it actually can't occur. It can't be modified into usable office space. It doesn't have the right code parameters to be able to do that. Kate, I don't know if you want to weigh in, since you've done a lot of legwork on that.
Well, yeah, we had a study done, that the appropriation was for a study, and we got not terribly far into the study with the architect, Silva Petricelli, and they were able to tell us, because of the need for egress and all the regulations around needing 2 points of egress, they can't cross, or they can't be like basically the same pathway, and how close they have to be to where people are located. There was no way for us to put any kind of significant office space in that, or office in that space. Maybe if we had a 1 or 2 person office, that would be it. So we abandoned the project, and we actually asked to have those funds repurposed for the fencing at the drill tower that RTM had cut out of the budget. In particular, because the RTM cut, their justification was that there were funds in the Roten Heights natural gas hookup available, which was not true.
Yeah, in fact, I forgot to mention that we did do that appropriation last night, or vote on funding that project, and this was what the RTM or an F&B had cut as part of the budget process last spring. Before we reverse that, just to take into account the concerns raised at the RTM, Frank and Dan from my board spent some time with Jack and others just to say, look, the need does really appear to be urgent, and we'd like to go ahead and go forward with that, but in the spirit of communication, tee that up with them to make sure they were okay with reversing that decision. So to your point, we used the funds not expended for the basement project to fund the drill tower fence. It's about $45,000. So no further appropriation is needed for that, so that can move forward. So.
Yeah. So thank you. Just to follow on that, so everybody probably remembers that when we were doing the, whatever you want to call it, the shuffle, the facilities optimization project, the RTM was very firm in their viewpoint that the Board of Ed should only have the same amount of admin space in the new building that they had here at Town Hall. However, in light of the fact that we can't really find an appropriate alternate use for the basement of 35 Leroy, given the outcomes of this study, I had spoken to Dr. Adley some time ago about whether the district wanted to come forward with some kind of a proposal to the town. I know that might be a bit controversial for the RTM, but I want to let you know that that offer still stands. If there's, I know that you have a print shop, for example, and it might not be ideally located behind your board meeting table.
Yes.
So
Sometimes a little loud.
we welcome the dialogue about that, and I don't want to lose sight of the opportunity to maybe
Yeah,
do something.
he did mention that briefly to me. I think this was all even pre-COVID, or
Mhm.
right around this all hit, so I don't want to speak for him. He may have big plans, but we haven't heard any big plans, and we will follow up with that.
Perfect. Okay, before I finish my
Although,
report, go
one
ahead.
other, Kate, I imagine we would face some of the same egress concerns. in
If you were
terms of
putting
even if
people
one
down
or
there.
twos, Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you might want to be thinking about, it's being used for storage, and it's a
Yes.
fine place for storage. If you had something like that in another location that you could relocate to the basement
Yeah.
and then relocate your shop there.
Mhm. Okay.
Thank you.
I'll turn to Seth before I finish.
I had talked to Jack Davis, and I understood that the fence had been reconciled, so that's good. One concern is the impact, the economic impact of unemployment on the town, and what that might do to tax collection, or is there a...
So far, Seth, our tax collections for fiscal '20 were actually, the collection rate was higher than anticipated. So that's part of the reason for the positive
Yeah.
results of operations. We did have a number of people who took advantage of the opportunity to defer their taxes based on what the RTM had approved. And we do expect at least 85% of those people will make payment in full by October 1st.
What was it, about $1 million that got deferred?
It was less than $1 million,
Less
yeah.
than $1 million. Yeah, and that's great. And Jennifer had explained last night that they've been in contact with those taxpayers, and so by the October 1st deadline, about 85% of that funding is expected. So I'm not concerned about it. From a tax standpoint, I mean, we're all very mindful of anyone who's facing employment or career issues in this difficult time. So we have not teed up anything further in terms of trying to provide relief or town support in that regard, but we certainly remain empathetic to that community. So,
And Seth, further, we plan to, after the first quarter is done, we will be starting to look at the town budget, the revenues, the expenses. We have 5 accounts that we think will be sensitive to COVID, or other things impacting it that might cause us to need to seek additional funding on the town's part. So we'll be on top of it and monitoring it to see if we have any issues.
So, Kate and Jamie,
Mm-hmm.
and Jamie, picking up off of that good point you made before about the COVID testing, and
Yeah.
sometimes your residence is where it gets into the aggregate, whether you're actually here or not.
Right.
On unemployment, as we start to plan, and this is an inform me question, because I don't know, am I correct in that being employed in Darien, whether you live here and are a taxpayer or not, will hit our unemployment rate? So just as we look at what the town's unemployment.
You mean the rate when they say, 4% unemployed in Darien?
Yeah,
It'd be the people who live here,
so it's taxpayers within Darien at 4%.
residents.
Residents.
But it doesn't, it will not tell you the data of people that might have been employed in New York and lost their New York job. So that is a missing piece of our data set,
Yep.
unfortunately. And I would say that things look very optimistic right now, and I don't really have any indicators to suggest that things will degrade, but I would offer to the Board of Finance to just really watch that carefully, because you know, people who have been unemployed have been propped up a lot.
Mhm.
You know, in these first months of COVID, those subsidies are likely coming to an end. Businesses that haven't reopened might be reopening in a different employment posture. So I would say that, you know, the next probably 6 months could be very telling in terms of how that shakes out for job loss, unemployment, and ultimately ability to pay property tax.
That's an important point. My firm has started working back in New York City. We started last Tuesday, and we're now a little more than a week into it. And I can tell you that the trains are not crowded. Grand Central Station in the morning is not crowded.
Nobody there.
It's spotless, so I mean, you shouldn't feel afraid to go into New York. I can say that the trains
Never
really are.
seen it cleaner.
They're absolutely
Right.
spotless, and interestingly, I'd say mass compliance on the trains are 100% as far as I can tell, and they've started to enforce that. And even on the street in New York, I'd say 95, 98%. It's really quite amazing that you'd have New Yorkers complying with something like that.
I think after what they've been through.
Yeah.
Right, but I can tell you, New York City is dead as a doornail. I mean, everything is shut down. It's hard to find a place to have lunch. The restaurants they're gonna have 25% capacity permitted September 30th, but in 60 days, they can't eat outside anymore because it's too cold. But, and it's unfortunate because venue after venue, it's not just closed for COVID, it's boarded up and we're done. And it's gonna be a long time for New York to come back, so.
Yeah.
There are other exacerbating issues for New York too,
Right.
at this point in time. But I think I worry about businesses and corporations that are reviewing their structure, their corporate structure, and, you know, looking to, you know, maybe not return as many people to work as they had. So anyway, only to say we should try and watch that. I know everybody will be watching that very carefully.
Yeah, agreed.
Seth?
The only other thing I had is I wouldn't want to preclude a briefing on COVID before the RTM by the Board of Finance. It's a big deal. I mean, I could have committees sit in, but it's not the same.
Okay.
Uh,
Absolutely. Kind of a
yeah.
separate briefing for the.
Yeah, you are, I appreciate it, but, you know, it's, I think on this
So
one.
my only
it's-
point is that you'd probably want to do that as a Zoom meeting, or I don't know what you're going to do.
It's all Zoom, yeah.
So, yeah, that's.
Well, we don't, yeah, it's
Completely fine.
relatively painless, I would say.
Yep.
We're getting tremendous attendance in the RTM using the Zoom and GoToMeeting. 98 people in the last, I'm just sitting there. The trick for us, and Kate has been tremendous in helping us orchestrate 98 people on Zoom or GoToMeeting. It's not, we're constantly looking around, and we took the liberty of calling the moderator of the Greenwich representative town meeting. So, well, how are you recognizing people, counting votes, what procedure are you using? I got a letter back about yay long on the procedure that they're using. And so we were not anywhere near prepared to do anything this time around, but we'll look at it and see if there's some way that, if there's an improvement that we can do over what we've been doing.
I feel your pain, Seth. You're in your own hybrid remote.
It's like,
Painless is a word to describe those meetings. Maybe there are other words. Maybe not that.
well, we do hear after the meeting.
Indeed.
Yes, there is feedback for sure. So.
There's been a learning curve.
Yes, but you've done a great job, Kate,
That's
and
all.
we have some training
Okay.
people, so.
Thank you, John.
What else? We have a meeting coming up Monday night, a representative town meeting. It's pretty basic stuff. The only thing that will not take place is approval of the lease of the parking space in Metro North. It's not ready yet. Term sheets have been exchanged. They're working on it, but it just won't be ready till October, so We'll postpone that one until October, but the rest, the steep and COVID-19 related expense, that'll all, I think, be approved. And we'll add Kevin Tresh to the Western Connecticut Tourism District. Very good.
Anything else?
No, I think it's pretty basic stuff here this time around.
Okay, great, then we'll go to Jeremy for planning and zoning update.
Covering for Steve O'Vanny this morning. Following up on Seth's note that Oxford School will be on the RTM agenda. I was at Public Works last night. Their vote was unanimous in favor of the right to drain from DOT onto the property. Sewer approval was granted last Friday for that project. The last step is this drainage easement, and then I expect Kip and his group will be ready to go in a few months. So that's good news. That's well on its way. At your last meeting, you talked a little bit about the requirement for an affordable housing plan. I did contact Department of Housing. They've hired a consultant to come up with the various criteria and requirements for a plan. Those requirements will be ready, what they say is around Thanksgiving. Once we get the requirements and parameters, we'll reach out to a consultant to help us. The money's already in the budget, with the expectation to get started probably in January and be done by this time next year on that affordable housing plan. A quick update on the various large projects in town. The big change you're going to see over the next few months is downtown, where David Genovese will get started on the Corbin project. The first step in that is taking the above ground stream, drainage ditch, whatever you want to call it, that runs basically from Gopher Ice Cream all the way to Old Kings Highway. It's going to take that and put it underground. That work will probably get started late October, and it's going to take a few months. Once that's done, he'll start with the demolition probably early next year, probably January, of the gas station and the buildings on, I'll call it the east or north side of Corbin. He's going to have to relocate a few tenants. I've already spoken with David about where those tenants are going to go. There's not a lot of vacant space in town. So it's starting to move from that end. As to Federal Realty, you see them out there every day. They expect the new Walgreens, which you see a little bit of the form coming forth, to be ready about a year from today, plus or minus. And the Palmers probably won't get started till after the first of the year would be depending on the weather. I think they've decided to hold out for the winter and start next year. I last spoke to Mr. Palmer a month and a half ago. So things might change, but that's the sense he gave me at the time.
Okay, any other questions for Jeremy? We have people moved in to the Royal, which is great. Kate and I had a chance to go see those units there. They're beautiful. So really nice.
Ellie expects full capacity by October. Right now, there's
Fantastic. Yep.
1/3 of the folks are in. She expects the building to be entirely full within a month from now.
And paramedics have been relocated back into 701, which is terrific. So lots of good stuff going on, and I love to hear that we don't have many vacancies in town. That's an important big deal. Anything for Jeremy? No. Okay, couple things for me. COVID update, which I gave Monday night. We have, as of today, 255 total cases since March 12th, which is remarkable, in my opinion. Remembering that a number of those cases, 16 hospitalizations. We haven't had a hospitalization since May. And 5 deaths. Several of those hospitalizations and deaths were from folks who reside in one of our 3 assisted living communities. So all in all, we really have to give great credit to our community for doing a great job, doing all the right things to protect themselves, their families, and the community. And we continue to post that data. Anybody that wants to follow it, it's updated every day on the town website. The red banner's still at the top of the homepage. Click on COVID, and you can get all the data and the charts. And so elections, we are registrars of voters and our town clerks have been super busy preparing for the November election. It's going to be different. We are anticipating approximately processing 8,000 mail-in ballots, up from approximately 1,900 in a typical presidential year, so they're hiring some extra staff to help with that. Secretary of State's office was nice and allocated some extra money to municipalities, which we're receiving about $17,000 to help offset the additional costs for processing the election this year. I do recommend that anybody that is going to vote by mail, bring it to the box out front. If you have any concerns, ballots won't be available until October 2nd. So, if you let it sit on your counter for a little while and you don't return it via mail right away, want to make sure that it gets here in time and that every vote gets counted. So feel free to drop it off in the drop box right out front, secure drop box. They go to that box several times every day to retrieve the ballots. There is another planned special legislative session the end of September. What I understand will be on that agenda so far are some legislation relating to the utility issues that we continue to experience after storm events. I don't know what that legislation is going to be yet. I saw something in the news this morning that there might be some changes to the Transfer Act also brought forward in that special session. And there was a hope that there would be kind of a pretty broad zoning and housing reform bill, several bills actually, brought forward. They may not make it into the special session, but they'll certainly be coming for the regular session in 2021. So I'll be publishing a lot more information about the zoning and housing changes in the near term. Hopefully you've driven by Highland Farm. It's being well used. It's awesome to see parents out there teaching their little ones to ride two-wheel bikes. Really fun. I want to remind everybody that it's not intended for any motorized vehicles of any kind unless it's a motorized wheelchair. Our walking trail is ADA compliant, but don't take your go-kart out there or your motorized scooters. It's really meant for walking and jogging and passive recreation. No drones, no kites, and no hitting golf balls. We found a lot of golf balls in there.
All of which occur, so.
Exactly.
No dogs off leash.
No dogs off leash. No dogs off leash. It's very dangerous for the horses. Our landscape architect has a draft plan that has been informed by input from the neighbors. He's going to put some finishing touches on that plan, take it back to the adjacent neighbors, get their final general stamp of approval, and then it will be available for the public to weigh in on. We have applied for a steep grant to help offset the costs of any landscaping that we do at Highland Farm. We don't know what the cost yet could be of the plan. We'll certainly try and hopefully we're going to keep our fingers crossed on the steep grant, which I think we should hear about by the end of September. If we can't accomplish all we want to with the monies that we have, we might either come to you for an appropriation or build a plan of, over a few years to be able to finalize the final landscaping plan. But it's going to be very nice. It will incorporate a pollinator pathway. And we intend, although we're going to bring it before the Board of Selectmen at our next meeting, we intend for Highland Farm to be kind of our first demonstration public space for not using pesticides and the use of organic fertilizers only. So thought that would be a good place to try that out. Had a great conversation with the group called Advanced CT. They are the new version of the Connecticut Economic Resource Commission, and they're doing business development for the state of Connecticut. So we had a great call the other day with a couple developers in town, and we're putting together some information for a Darien page to their slide deck that they're actively recruiting businesses from New York and other places So I think that's very good news. And it was exciting to be able to share with them all the great stuff that's happening here in Darien. The one issue that I, among many others, that I really need to address in a meaningful way is, and not unique to Darien, is the problem with our internet service. Everybody working at home, schooling from home, there's simply not enough bandwidth through the limited number of providers that we have. Optimum pretty much has a lock on the market. I'm not sure if Verizon Fios is here or not. I don't believe that they're very prevalent. There is another provider that's beginning to roll out service in certain communities across Connecticut, and WestCog is going to be bringing us information about that. We need to figure out a solution on how to enhance internet service for our community. I get complaints every day about it. And then we engage Optimum, and it's just a vicious circle. You might be interested to know, relating to COVID, that Yale University is doing a study of sewage treatment plants. They're doing point source testing at a number of sewage treatment plants in urban centers across Connecticut. And the idea is that they can detect COVID in wastewater, which is a leading indicator of spikes in COVID cases in the community. Mayor Martin sent out a warning to his community on August 31st because they had seen a spike in their wastewater. Excuse me. They did see a slight uptick in positive test cases, but not till 10 days afterward. So it's not to be used for any policy making, but it's a really, really interesting study. And they're thinking about using it around college campuses and places like that that have their own independent sort of wastewater treatment. But I bring that up because about 12 to 14% of the effluent that's processed in Stamford comes from the town of Darien. So we are monitoring all of that Stamford waste treatment plant data on a regular basis. And on behalf of Terry, she just wanted me to share what the subject of the special legislative session was going to be, the utility issues thus far. That's it for me. If anybody has anything else for today.
Just for John, the parking fund is one fund that may be seriously negatively impacted by COVID. Because if you drive by, you'll notice not many.
There's nobody there.
There's nobody.
Empty, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so.
so what percentage of the parking fund is from daily ticket sales as opposed to?
It's about close 60 to 70% of the revenues.
Okay.
You know, figure about 400,000 from the permits and 500 to 600 from the daily. So that's.
Do we keep all of that, or how much of that goes to the state? or-
None of it goes to the state anymore, but, you know, the Leroy West revenue, that's permits, that's the only thing
Right.
that we keep. I think we keep, the town side gets a percentage of the pay stations, but between the parking tickets and the pay stations, we're hurting.
Okay, do you have a sense of how much that might be on a run rate basis, an annual basis?
That we're gonna be
Yeah.
short. Well, on an annual basis, it's about $600,000, and we're just not, we're not getting that. So.
Parking's easy if it's, a consolation.
Yeah, no problem.
Well,
Well, yeah, we haven't gotten any complaints that people can't find a space.
It was one of the pieces of information that factored into the Board of Selectmen's decision to move forward the idea of leasing the space to Metro North.
Right.
I wanted to share with you too, along the same lines. We have some COVID-related expenses on the town side. You know, we're funding the tent and a number of other things. We've had to outfit our offices here in anticipation of opening fully to the public, which we're following the school schedule, by the way. So when you guys open, hopefully on the 29th, to your full school population, we will be opening town hall to the public.
Okay.
But really, the biggest hit for us is the loss of revenues
Right.
across a number of departments. So our report will probably look a little bit different than the Board of Ed's report
Good to know.
on COVID costs. Okay, if there's nothing else for today, then we have meeting minutes from July 15th. And if you, when you have had a chance to review, I'll entertain a motion to approve if there are no edits.
I can go back and check. My only thing is here is, I don't want to misunderstood opportunities to match teachers with students to be e-learning. There are not discrete groups of teachers that will be dealing with e-learners. So I can go back and watch, but that certainly has never been the plan. I don't know if maybe it was misunderstood that, but I'll go back and watch and see if that's what I said, but that is not the case. We do not have discrete teachers doing e-learning with discrete students. We have live streaming from classrooms.
Okay. Okay.
My section looks okay.
Okay. I'm good. Tara, why don't we just make sure that we add into the minutes of today's meeting your clarification, so that we don't have to actually go back and watch the video, since school is now open, right? So, and things changed from July.
And the plan, my only thing is the plan was out, so these days everyone's going back and the state has changed the goalposts a couple times.
Sure.
So
Really?
as long as everyone is clear that that is not what is occurring, or that was the district's intent, we can do it in today's minutes. I'm fine with that.
Perfect, so, I don't know if Kate or Valentina has it. Okay, got it.
Yeah, I mean,
Perfect. Okay.
Any question, just let me know and I'll.
Yep.
Okay, so I'll entertain a motion to approve. John moves, may I have a second? Tara seconds, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, abstentions, Seth abstains, okay, motion carries. Great, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by, seconded by Tara, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Great, have a wonderful day.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Jeremy.